So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Devin Horton. I am the Graduate Diversity Officer for STEM disciplines here at UC Davis. Well, they're at UC Davis. Is anybody here at UC Davis? And so my job includes a lot of things, but one of them is advocating for graduate students from historically marginalized communities. And oftentimes that has me giving presentations like the one that you've signed up to listen to today, which is how to identify and combat microaggressions. Now, if you've been in one of my presentations recently, two things are going to be true. Yes, we are doing the exact same icebreaker. It's a damn good icebreaker. And number two, if you've already heard this before, it can be a refresher, but it really isn't that different. It's just been updated to include breakout room stuff. So if you just like hearing me talk, welcome back. For those of you who are new, thank you for coming. Apparently a lot of people signed up, which is really great. We get to do a lot more, I think, in Zoom and virtually than we can often do in person because we don't usually have the space. And so I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to serve more students and postdocs and folks who are here. So with that being said, I am going to share my screen and get started. So today we're going to talk about identifying and surviving microaggressions. And the reason that this presentation I think is a little bit different is because often we are learning what microaggressions are and we are learning how not to perpetrate them. But rarely do we get a conversation that focus on those of us who tend to be targets of microaggressions and how we can fight that. And so that's what today's talk is going to be about. Muting my phone. Okay. So the goal is to develop a strategy for responding to microaggressions before they occur. And that's whether you're typically a target of a microaggression or if you're going to be a bystander. And because of being a bystander, you might be an ally. The other goal is to develop tools to recognize microaggressions as they're occurring, which even after this workshop would still be a little bit of a challenge because they happen so quick that oftentimes the offender is gone and you're left thinking, did that just happen? Is that a thing? And so we're going to try and help you get to, yes, that is a thing, or no, that wasn't a thing. So after participating in this workshop, you should be able to define and identify some of the most common occurrences of microaggressions, identify the impact and outcomes that are often associated with the experience of microaggressions, and then of course, identify practical ways to safely and comfortably push back against them should you so desire. Remember, you always have a choice. Now, every presentation that I give, I tend to give this disclaimer, and that's because most of my presentations have to do with equity and inclusion issues. And so I like to tell you up front that oppressed people do not owe anyone education. It is not the job of the oppressed to enlighten or educate their oppressors. There is no reason to feel guilty about not wanting to engage in the extra taxing, often uncompensated, intellectual and emotional labor of educating people on their problematic behaviors. While it is a kind, generous thing to do, we don't owe it to anyone. We deserve self-care, and that might mean not educating. I chose to do this work, so you can ask me questions. I get paid to do it, but in my private life, I don't spend my energies talking about this too much because it can be very overwhelming. So I just want to put that out there, both if you're a person who falls into this population and if you're a person who doesn't, but who wants to be a better ally, but can't understand why someone might not want to be the teacher for you. Okay, so the way that the activities for the breakout rooms are going to work is I'm going to show you a slide that has the instructions, and then I'm going to put in the chat a link to a Google document so that when you go into your breakout rooms, you can actually still see the instructions. And I think I can also do a call out, but I think this is too long for a call out. So that's typically what I do. So to break the ice, what we're going to do is ship you off to breakout rooms. You're going to introduce yourselves, your name, where you're from, what's your degree program or objective. And then you're going to use the last 5 minutes to discuss 5 unique things that you all might have in common. So everybody might be an only child, and that will be the thing you want to come back, or that might be the most unique thing that everybody figures out. And so after you do that, you'll come back and you'll report back to the larger group. This is a pretty big group, so I'm going to give you about 7 minutes. I normally give them only 5, but they always say that's not enough. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to share the link in the chat. All right, so we broke the ice. We're done there. Good job, everyone. So everybody has an identity. Some of those identities are visible, some of those identities are invisible. It could be your age, your gender, your religion, your spirituality, so on and so forth. Most people have multiple identities. And for some people, there is oppression associated with a particular identity, and having multiple oppressive identities is what we refer to as intersectionality, where your identities and your oppressions, I don't know, I'm drawing a blank, but anyway, where they intersect, right? So if you're, excuse me, an Indigenous trans woman, right, you've got these intersecting oppressions. And so that's what we talk about when we mean, or that's what we mean when we talk about intersectionality. But everybody has an identity, whether it's an oppressed identity or not. Identities can be broken down into majority versus minority status. And what that looks like is when you have the majority or a member of a dominant social group, privileged by birth or acquisition, who either knowingly or unknowingly exploit and reap unfair advantages over members of the target group. So in this case, the agent is a member of the majority group. And the ways that they exact or exploit folks in the target group is by discrimination, marginalization, exploiting, disenfranchisement, so on and so forth. Folks who are part of the quote unquote minority group are members of social identity groups who are discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, exploited, so on and so forth by the agent. The thing is, of course, on the one hand, an agent or an agent group has the power to define and name reality. They get to determine what is normal, what is real, and what is correct. And because of that, there's often differential and unequal treatment that is actually institutionalized and systematic, or systemic, it should say systemic, not systematic. So what that means is because the dominant group controls everything, the byproduct of that is that their personal biases, whether they're intentional or not, end up baked into the fabric of institutions. And so even when a person maybe has changed their behavior or changed their point of view because it was a knowing discrimination, oftentimes their impact, if they held positions of power, remain. So think about the courts, think about education, think about law enforcement, things like that. Stuff is baked in. The discrimination and the oppression is baked into those things. Some of the other actions and impacts of agents include psychological colonization of the target group. So that occurs through socializing the oppressed to internalize their oppressed condition. So you might have Black friends, for example, and I'm using this because I am a Black person, who maybe are very pro, I don't know, pro Kanye West. Kanye is a hot mess and hasn't been pro Black people in a very long time. But it's easy to look at sort of his success and his ability to move through capitalism in a way that benefits him and his family, and then aspire to that without any recognition of the foundations of capitalism, which are slavery. It's rooted in slavery, right? So that you've internalized the oppression from the oppressor. And that's also part of it being systemic, right? Because it's baked in, it's really easy to unintentionally internalize these things. Oftentimes, the target group's culture, language, and history is misrepresented. So the most blatant case of that for us to recognize is the Indigenous population in this country. It is discounted or eradicated, and then the dominant group culture is imposed. Right now, the focus of this talk is on the United States, because that's where we are, but this isn't unique to us. This is very common. It's the human way. So oppression happens at all levels. at the individual level, the interpersonal level, the institutional level, and of course, societal and cultural levels. And this has major implications, particularly thinking about societal and cultural. So when you're talking about collective ideas about what is right, who gets to determine what's right? And how is it that somebody's right over here, what someone has determined is right here may negatively impact someone elsewhere. So for example, the LGBTQIA community, right? So personal beliefs might be that it is wrong, but if society takes that perspective and implements laws and policies along those lines, you're inevitably going to oppress a group of an entire group of people. So it happens at all levels. But the other thing that I was going to say earlier, because I thought the slide was coming up, is that it turns out targets of oppression can also oppress. So we are not above being bad, behaving badly. So it's really important that we mind our own behavior. All right. So one way that oppression plays out in real life is by microaggressions. And so according to the folks down bottom, you can see down here, Sue Capodulipo, Torino. Anywho, microaggressions are a brief, commonplace, daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity. And this is whether it's intentional or unintentional, but it communicates a hostile, derogatory, or negative slight or insult. That's sort of a short version of what a microaggression is. Racial microaggressions are the brief and everyday slights and insults, indignities, and denigrating messages that are sent to people of color by well-intentioned people who are unaware of the hidden messages that are being communicated. Excuse me. So normally I would send you away, but this is not going to be one of our Think Pair shares. I'm just going to tell you the answer to this. So often when I do this, I have people discuss what is the relationship between impact and intention. And a lot of well-intended people feel like intentions should matter, but it turns out in reality that intentions don't matter. The impact is much more important than the intention. And my best explanation for that or example of that is drunk driving. So if a person is driving a car drunk and they hit another car and the passengers in that car are bodily or harmed or die, the person certainly did not intend to hurt those people, but the person is still guilty of having hurt those people. So intentions don't trump impact. And that's really important because when a person tries to speak up about a particular microaggression, often the offender says, oh, well, that wasn't what I intended. And that is supposed to be a blanket apology that the target is supposed to then just accept. And that's just not the case. Impact trumps intention every time. Microaggressions are often subtle. They are almost always unintentional, which is why intention can't really matter. And they're often very ambiguous, and they leave the offended going, did that just happen? Was that even a microaggression? I just don't know. And so this is a really common way that microaggressions play out. So where do they even come from in the first place? Wait a minute, did I miss a slide? No, microaggressions are a result of implicit biases. So our implicit biases lead to assumptions that we make, and then those assumptions oftentimes are the root cause of the microaggression. So implicit bias, which I'm sure all of you have heard by now, refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which can be both favorable and unfavorable, are activated involuntarily and without the individual's awareness or intentional control. That's really important because when you have perpetrated a microaggression and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to do that, you don't even have to say that because it's usually driven by an implicit bias. It isn't usually overt. So this last point is really important. Residing deep in the subconscious, these biases are different from known biases that individuals may choose to conceal for the purpose of social and or political correctness. So as opposed to being something that I just don't want to admit to, implicit biases are not accessible through introspection. You can't think about it and then find your implicit bias. It doesn't work like that. So that's why, that's another reason why saying that I didn't intend to hurt someone doesn't really matter, because that's not where microaggressions come from most of the time anyway. Okay. So the assumptions can be good or bad, which is really important to note, because assuming, for example, that all Black people are great dancers or that all Asian people are good at math, those sound good, but they're not. Implicit biases are often based on a variety of factors, which include gender identity, religion, ability, citizenship, perceived class. I mean, just anything you can think of. These are the way that our brain processes this information. You sort of have to be able to quickly rely on things in order to exist as a human being. And so all of the things that we hear and see over a lifetime help to develop the implicit biases that we have. So with that, we're going to move into our first breakout room activity. So think of a time where either you either experienced a microaggression or maybe perpetrated a microaggression. And some examples are there. So I'm going to put the link in the chat, and then I'm going to send you all back to your breakout rooms. Okay, welcome back. Does anybody want to share? This part's a little bit harder because people don't really like to talk about their own bad behavior. So maybe you'd rather talk about some experience you've had, but I'm open to hearing all of it. Just unmute yourself and start talking. There's no rhyme or reason to any of this. So I can go first. I'll tell you a really funny one. Actually, okay. I had so many. It was an interesting last job I had. Maybe I'll wait because I think I might have given you one of mine as an example. Wait, hold on. Let me confirm. Let's see. Oh, maybe not.
Devin, if you're not comfortable, I can go.
Oh, I am, but you can go ahead. I just want to make sure I don't tell them one that I'm also going to give them as a case study. Okay. Go ahead, Nicole. I'm going to.
I have 3 quick examples because I've been both a perpetrator and a victim and been a bystander. And so the first one was when I was in college. There was not a lot of women in chemistry still. And I remember a professor asking a question and I answered it. And he genuinely looked shocked that I knew the answer. And he was like, oh, wow. Oh, that's my girl. And I was like, totally pointed out my gender first thing, right? The second one was when I was an early advisor and I had a student and I was getting familiar with her name and I was like, how do you pronounce that? And she said Emilce, and I was like, oh, Emilce, that's beautiful, that's so exotic. And I was, oh, instantly head smack, I said the word exotic. Totally made her feel like she was somehow a stranger to the, or didn't belong. And I just, like 20 years later, I'm still kicking myself for it. Good lesson.
We always feel guilty.
And then third thing is I'm part Vietnamese, but most people don't know this. And so they feel comfortable telling me stuff about Asians and stuff about Vietnamese people. And of course, I experience it as a microaggression, even though they didn't identify me as a Vietnamese. Like, oh, Asians, all they know is how to work. They don't ever have fun. Or there's too many Vietnamese people in San Jose. And I was like,
yeah.
Anyway, there you go.
Tough. Thank you, Nicole. Brave. I like it. Anybody else? So I will tell you one funny one. So I was dressed, I don't know, I had on some like pants that were like those, those MC Hammer old pants. They're kind of baggy or whatever. I don't know, genie pants, whatever. But it was in the Jamaican colors. So it was like yellow, green, whatever. And I kind of had, I don't usually, but I sometimes wear my head wrapped up. So I looked pretty I looked like the Chiquita Banana lady to me. And someone says, wow, you look awfully ethnic today. I said to her, you can't say that to people. I'm pretty sure that's a microaggression. So yeah, definitely, yes. Or that I was in an office once where there were only 2 Black people, which isn't a big deal, but, well, it is a big deal, but whatever. There was a desire to have a game where we guessed everybody's baby picture. And I said, well, how long do you think it's going to take for them to figure out who we are? These are the things that you don't even think about. That wasn't on purpose. That had to be implicit. Just we all look the same. Nobody will be able to guess the baby picture. So anyway, those are my funky ones. I also did a really not great one because I perpetrated against a person who had an obvious disability, and I was like overcompensating on the help, and he was just looking at me like, lady, I got this. And I was like, oh yeah, I probably should have waited to be asked. My bad. So yeah, you never forget the ones you do. You never do. Anybody else want to share? No? Okay.
I'll share one that I thought of that I didn't share in the group that I just remember that I still struggle with is saying you guys when I'm talking to a group of people. And it's just so hard for me because I just grew up doing that. And now that I'm in education, I've been teaching classes for several years. I really have to think about not doing that. Okay, we'll see you guys next week, It's just, and most of the time I can catch myself, but just a couple weeks ago I didn't, and I still remember it. It's just really hard.
That's a really good one. I've been trying to unlearn you guys since I started teaching 10 years ago. And it's not, I'm never, but I'm a y'all kind of girl anyway. So luckily I have y'all in my lexicon. I don't know if other people have y'all in your lexicon. So it's harder.
I've tried to switch to y'all, but it's nice to hear that it's probably a common one.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
Problem. So.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else before we move on?
I've had a few uncomfortable experiences with people touching my hair without permission. Strangers or like lab mates just coming up behind me after I do my hair in a different way and touching my locks without really talking to me about that beforehand. Or a really uncomfortable situation I had with my future mother-in-law. So my fiance is white. And then we were talking about like eating frog legs, which is something I did as a kid. And I said, it tastes like chicken. And then she said, oh, everything must taste like chicken to you. And it was just, I'm not sure if that is like microaggression or goes into the aggression area, but we had a conversation about it because it was not cool. And yeah.
The thing is, when we say micro, we only mean the scale. The aggression is big. It does not matter how tiny. It's like a death by 1,000 paper cuts. I swear, it's awful. At least these, we are able to be like, yeah, no, this is wrong. But then there are some, the ones that are the most gnawing at you are the ones where you walk away and you want to tell everyone so that they can validate that you're not crazy because you know what you just heard was a microaggression, but you don't, it's so vague and so ambiguous. And so part of the next phase of this is to talk about like, well, what do we do? How do we get into that? And I know we're down on time because I think the breakout rooms are a lot of fun. So I tend to leave y'all in there a little while because people seem to like that. So I'm gonna move through the next part of the presentation so I can put you back in the breakout room one more time. All right, so okay. So we know what microaggressions are. What are microresistances? They're a way to fight back. So microresistances are incremental daily efforts to challenge white privilege as, well, that's an odd place to put the parenthesis. That was a mistake. As well as other kinds of privilege based on gender, sexuality, class, etc. Excuse me, they help targeted people cope with microaggressions. They also help allies to defend the targeted people when it's possible. So Chung and et al. Came up with this really cool acronym as a safe way for people to address microaggressions, particularly at work, but also in society. And it's really important because there are vast power differentials depending on where you are. And so your ability to address the microaggression isn't the same across experiences. The other thing that I will tell you that probably shows up in here, not as bluntly, but I'm just gonna be blunt, read the room. Right? You don't want to be challenging the chancellor on a microaggression in front of everyone and think you're going to get the kind of response that you deserve. So you just have to read the room as we go through these. Okay. So the A is for ask clarifying questions to assist with understanding the microaggressor's intentions. Now, I should also preface this with every single item on here I do in practice, but I do it in a very sassy way. Because let me tell you something, microaggressions really is death by 1,000 paper cuts, and I don't have it to give anymore. All my F's are out the window. So probably 10 or 15 years ago, I was much more demure about it, but now I'm just like, what do you mean by that? So I'm just letting you know that if you have a bit of an attitude when you ask some of these questions, read the room. It's okay, because sometimes it is frustrating. Because if someone tells you that your clothes are ethnic, what am I going to say? I want to make sure that I understand what you were saying. Were you saying that? Yeah, no, I didn't have that to give that day. So I said something very sassy. But oftentimes the microaggressions are so quick and they move on so quickly because the offender doesn't realize they've done anything that you don't even get the opportunity to respond in a sassy way. So for me, when I get it, I take it. However, you don't have to be like me, be better than me. Ask clarifying questions to assist with the understanding of their intentions. Carefully listen. If they disagree with your paraphrase, you could end the conversation and be done with it, or you could make a statement about their initial comment. If they agree with your paraphrase, that might be an opportunity to explore further. And in this instance, while intentions don't matter in terms of the impact, they do matter in as much as if you're going to spend the energy educating someone, they think they were doing A, but they were doing B, and perhaps you can let them know, well, no, you weren't doing A. I know you intended to do that, but here's actually what you did. So in that regard, if we're talking about educating people on their behavior, the intentions matter, but the intent of it doesn't matter, doesn't have any weight on how their behavior impacts the target. Tell others what you observed as problematic behavior in a factual manner. I noticed that, blah, blah, blah. So this is really good for a person who isn't sure, but feels like they've had repeated microaggressive instances with a particular person. This is also good for allies because they're observing that and maybe they want to communicate with people to compare notes and make sure that they're not misunderstanding what it is they think they've seen or heard. Then there's the impact consideration. Ask for or state the potential impact of such a statement or action on others. So what do you think people think when they hear that kind of comment? This is for you, the target, but it can also be for an ally. And then of course, own your response. Own your own thoughts and feelings around the impact by using first person language. When you said that to me, I felt X, Y, Z, right? When I hear your comment, I feel, blah, blah, blah. So try and focusing on I statements as opposed to broad generalized statements, because that does tend to put people on the defense pretty quickly. And then next steps. You can request appropriate action be taken. You can check in with the target if you're an ally. You could tell the person, I'd appreciate it if you'd stop making these kind of comments because they impact so-and-so this way, or so on and so forth, however you want to do that. But yeah, this is the ACTION acronym, and I'm happy to send out, I think they may actually already have the slides, but I'm happy to send out the slides so that you can have it in your little toolkit to use for the future. So breakout room activity, there was a second one, but we're running low on time. So the last one that we're going to do is a series of scenarios, and you're going to read them, and then you're going to talk about what you would do. Before I send you to that breakout room, I'm actually going to go through the last part of the presentation because I know we're running out of time and I want to make sure that I get to it. So some tips for targets and allies. Increase your personal and psychological resources and strength through self-care. You have to remember that you came to this place for a reason, and the reason is much bigger than whatever it is that is probably happening at the moment. It does not mean that that thing that's happening doesn't matter, but it means that you are here for a bigger purpose. And many of you, I mean, getting a PhD, which I believe most of you are, but even getting a master's, it's not like there are that many people in the world who exist in these spaces. So you're about to be a part of a really tiny population of people in the world. And so you're gonna have way bigger fish to fry than that lady telling you your Jamaican pants were ethnic, right? So you have to read the room and make a decision. But the way that you strengthen the personal and psychological resources is by increasing your social resources. So you wanna participate in community building activities. You want to participate in additional mentoring programs where you get mentors outside of just your advisor, your primary advisor. You want many mentors, you want a diverse array of mentors, you want to have a social net, you want to have community, because you need somewhere to retreat away from all of those things. And if you don't build up the community, you won't be able to do that. Excuse me. The other thing you can do is practice using a speaking up strategy, like the women in the White House during Obama's tenure. So they did this thing where if one woman said something, another one would chime in and repeat what that woman said. And then a third woman would chime in and repeat what that woman said, so that she always got credit for her idea, but also that her voice was amplified. That's just one example. There are lots of ways that you can figure out amongst your friends and in your cohort how to ensure that you're safe and are being heard. For allies, just so you know, silence communicates approval. And that's true across all allyship, right? It's not just about racial microaggressions or gender microaggressions or whatever. When you're quiet, you are, there's a quote, I think MLK said, if you're quiet in times of injustice, some blah, blah, blah. One day I'm gonna remember, I'm gonna put that quote right in this presentation, not today. The other thing for allies is apologizing to the target of the microaggression after the fact, especially in private, just makes it worse. Don't do that. If you're not going to speak up, leave it be. Don't ask the target to fix the problem. That's a bad habit. That's a bad habit. Saying, hey, I noticed that so-and-so is always picking on you. Maybe you should blah, blah, blah. No, that's not how that works. It's, if you think about it in terms of rape, we often tell women to protect, or people to protect ourselves so that we don't get raped. What we are not telling enough people is to not rape. And I know my examples are very extreme, but they're very extreme because there isn't a lot of time and I need to make sure that you see it. But that is my point. Don't ask the target to fix the problem. That is not where this goes. Okay, the rest of this is check your own implicit bias. Harvard has the Implicit Bias Project. That thing is really good, but it is very scary. They have a lot of different tests. I encourage you, if you're bored one weekend, take a couple and you'd be surprised. So I'm gonna send you in your breakout room, and when you come back, we'll have a Q&A. I know we're, so one question is, what is the distinction between a micro and a macroaggression? Sometimes the micros feel macro. I think macro tends to denote intentional, right? It tends to, but I don't think that's automatically the case. I think that that even a microaggression sometimes feels very big, depending on what it is. So like the situation where the person said about my ethnic clothes, it was big because it was in front of a lot of other people. So even though to her it was just a slight, it was technically a microaggression, it felt very macro. And I felt very put on guard, like, okay, what do I do now? So I think that is how that goes. Oh, okay. Thank you, Inez.
We had a question that we were discussing kind of at the end. So kind of a two-part question. So I was kind of asking, like, at what point, like, so sometimes I feel like understanding someone's background, whether it's their religion or their, you know, where their family's from or where they used to live, or even different things, helps me understand them and helps me approach them well. And, you know, like I said to my group, like, you can attack me later for this, but like knowing that my boss is German helps me take his criticism, because he's very black and white, and I know I'm stereotyping and stuff, but understanding that, you know, in that culture, it's okay to say things as bluntly as he does, helps me not get all offended and in my feelings and stuff. And I feel bad for it, because I'm like, okay, he's his own person. But like, you know, there's that thing. And then another person in my lab was saying, you know, she had a friend who purposely wanted to work in a lab. You know, her friend was Asian, and she purposely wanted to work in the lab because the professor was Asian and all his employees were Asian. And like, how do you deal with something like that, where it's like there are differences, and it is, you know, understanding those differences helps us interact with people, but we also don't want to be offensive. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do. So everybody is going to make these mistakes. It's just a given. It's human nature. So in terms of being the person who would be the offender and not the offended, my take is always to just be humble and be open to being corrected, and to not take corrections personally. That's pretty much all you can do. You can't plan to not microaggress. If only it were that easy, I'd be selling it on the corners and I'd be loaded, but it's not. It's human nature to do those things. So you can't spend all of your time trying to think, but you should recognize them. Like Nicole mentioned when she said that the woman's name was exotic, she's like, oh wait, no, that's bad. right? So being able to recognize them and being humble enough to accept any corrections as they come, because they will come. As people become more aware and more comfortable about it, they certainly will, they will come.
Yeah. So another question I had, sorry, just to make it really quick, is how do you deal with microaggressions from someone in authority above you? Like I deal with a postdoc who is supposed to help run a project, and I'll make a suggestion and literally every time shoots me down. I don't know what I did, but how do I?
So that may not specifically be a microaggression. Microaggressions usually are targeted, they target you typically based on identifiable things. That may just be a really bad mentor, which is not uncommon, particularly if you're in grad school.
Right. But how about just a general thing, microaggressions from someone in authority above you?
Right. So that one is a little bit harder. And it just depends on who the person in authority is. But that's why you should have multiple mentors. Because if you have multiple mentors, these are the kinds of conversations you can have with mentors who are not attached to the advisor who's responsible for your success. You need multiple mentors. You need to be able to have, because every case is going to be specific, right, to whatever the incident is. So I can't give you a really broad and general answer, but what I can say is if you keep multiple mentors at the ready, then you should be able to have someone to communicate these issues with. Mm-hmm. I see a question in the chat that says, what is the best way for targets to fight against microaggressions in environments where they don't feel supported? Oh, that might lead to retribution. So that's back to having multiple mentors. You need them, particularly one or two who aren't attached to the mentor who's responsible for your success. The other thing is UC Davis and most institutions have an ombuds office, and sometimes individual programs might have them. So I don't know if like CBS, College of Biological Sciences, has their own ombudsperson. Is that a thing? No? Okay. So then maybe it's just campus wide. But the beauty of the ombudsperson is that you can go and talk to them and you can run things by them, and they don't have to report it. So they can give you feedback and advice and tell you on potential pathways for tending to the issue, but they don't have to report it. And they don't have to record your information, and the conversations are entirely confidential. So the office of the ombudsperson. People don't use that enough. They really, really should. It's a really great place to go and just throw all your problems at them, and then they give you ideas and they don't even have to report it. It's great. Anybody else? I know it's after 3. Oh yes, HDAP. Good job, Nicole. That's for It's something for discrimination against something employees. I don't know. Do you remember what it's called, Nicole? Can you chime in? Okay, there we go. Harassment, discrimination, assistance, prevention program. There we go. Thank you, Nicole. All right. Any other questions? If there aren't any, I'm gonna let y'all go because it's already past 3, and I thought we were gonna end a little bit early. But I'm sorry you didn't get more time to chat in the breakout rooms. I have to adjust this again. Maybe I'll make the presentation an hour and a half so that people can have more time in the breakout rooms.
And Devin, if I might add something, we do have workshops, ombuds workshops on our Eventbrite too. So there's one coming up next Tuesday. And I know that if anybody's interested in that, just keep looking for those invites or Eventbrite events in the future as well. There's one coming up Tuesday, but there'll be more in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, everyone. See you later.